food crisis now around the world.
Well, this is another example of how the shock doctrine, the strategy that I document in the book of using a crisis, using a situation of desperation, often a situation where developing countries need foreign aid because they're facing a disaster, to leverage very, very unpopular pro-corporate policies. Now, you know in the book the examples that I give are, for instance, how the tsunami in Asia was used, and the fact that countries like Sri Lanka needed aid, and in that moment you had international lenders coming in and say, oh, well, we'll give you aid, but we want you to privatize your water, your electricity system, hand the coastline over to resorts. Well, we're seeing a version of this. We're seeing a version of disaster capitalism in the context of the food crisis, where you have that same desperation, you have a need for aid, for debt forgiveness, for new policies. And now we're hearing another sort of echo chamber response from the World Bank, from the U.S. State Department, from the agribusiness companies. And that refrain is the cause of the food crisis is that too many of these countries don't allow genetically modified foods, and genetically modified crops can feed the world and solve the food crisis. So trying to use this crisis to break through a legislative barrier that exists for good reason. Just as domestically in the United States, the oil crisis is being used by the Bush administration to try to break through the bans on offshore oil, on ANWR. So now we have this other talking point that we're hearing again and again, which is genetically modified foods can feed the world. There is no scientific evidence for this. Quite the opposite. Genetically modified seeds do not increase yields for crops. They increase profits for agribusiness companies. They simplify farming, but they don't increase yields, and in many cases they decrease yields. Okay. Because this is actually not what they're genetically modified to do. I mean, if you think about Roundup Ready, I mean, what it's genetically modified to do is be compatible.
The soy and the fertilizer.
Yeah, to be compatible with Monsanto's fertilizer. It's not about increasing. It's not about increasing crop yields, and they haven't actually figured out the technology for how to increase crop yields. One of the things that I find really worrying is that companies, and similar to the oil crisis, Amy, we're seeing record profits from Monsanto, from Cargill, from all the big players in the context of the food crisis. We're also seeing something else, which is that these companies are buying up hundreds of patents on seeds that they claim are climate ready. Climate ready is, we've heard about Roundup Ready, which means they're ready for Roundup fertilizer. Now the new phrase is climate ready, which means they're ready for climate change, which means that these seeds apparently can grow in the context of drought, can grow in the context of highly salinated earth because there's been a flood. Monsanto and Syngenta and other of these big biotech companies have bought up hundreds of these patents. And this is worrying on many levels. I think it's worrying because, once again, we're seeing a disincentive to actually get us out of a future of climate chaos because we see ways to profit. But then when we look at how aggressively we know a company like Monsanto protects its patents when it comes to their Roundup Ready seeds, the suing of small farmers, the surveillance of farmers. There was an incredible story recently in Vanity Fair about the heavy-handed legal tactics and use of private security, just harassing farmers who dare to save their seeds from one growing season to the next, breaking Monsanto's patent. So if they really are developing seeds that are climate ready, and they're also patenting them and buying them up, then really what we're seeing is not a future of feeding the world, but once again, a future of kind of climate apartheid, where it becomes less accessible and more expensive to have the crops that will grow in this future. And so I think people need to identify this right away, and the discussion needs to be about the right to food, about food being a human right. This is far too important to allow players like Monsanto to privatize the future of the crops that can grow within a context of climate change.
Naomi Klein, we only have 5 minutes, and I really want to get to the piece you did in Rolling Stone. You just returned from China. China's all-seeing eye. With the help of U.S. defense contractors, China's building the prototype for a high-tech police state. It is ready for export. Mm-hmm. Tell us what you found.
Well, yeah, I was in China a couple months ago, and the piece came out recently, and you can read it still on the Rolling Stone website. I concentrated on the Pearl River Delta, on the city of Shenzhen, and this is the part of China that is really I guess the sweatshop to the world, the workshop to the world. This is where probably half of everything most of us